is a collective inner conflict brewing in our societies these days, an almost palpable sense of anxiety churning inside us over the relationship between our oneness and our diversity as human beings. Now, to many of us, the importance of recognizing our shared humanity will be obvious. Our commonalities as human beings runs deep. Our interdependence is self-evident and profound. In fact, you may very well wonder, what, if not the recognition of our shared humanity, can upend the catastrophic injustices and crises we face? But universalist appeals are not without their problems. They can obscure the diversity of humankind, the very real and important differences that make up the human experience. They can obscure the distinctive injustices that only some human beings have suffered and that we know require our deepest attention. They can lead to the fiction of colorblindness or to the ignorant cry that all lives matter. Even our most vital universalist ideals, ideals like moral equality and human rights, these recognize our shared humanity in a way that's ultimately generic and uniform. They struggle to give our differences their due. But when we lean too far in the other direction, in the direction of our traditional social identities, identities like race, ethnicity, nationality, and gender, we come up against a host of other ideas that don't feel quite right. We get the idea that our identities are our destiny, that we can't empathize with people different than ourselves, or that we can't transcend our socialization in the group-based hierarchies that we've inherited. We can end up essentializing these identities, turning them into fixed and impenetrable categories, and in doing so, we often replicate the very same problems we want to solve. So there's a real tension, it seems, between our oneness and our diversity. And it's a tension that many sincere and well-meaning people grapple with and are genuinely confused over. I'm going to make the case not only that our oneness and our diversity can be reconciled, but that the only real answer lies in elevating our concept of oneness to the level of identity. I'm going to show that an identity rooted in human oneness is in fact uniquely equipped to ensure the security and flourishing of our other identities, communities, and affiliations. Let's start with the idea that social identities are supposed to make us feel secure. Many philosophers have echoed this idea. We also find it in literature and politics and the arts. For example, you might have come across the metaphor of the nation as a warm and protective parent. And in fact, as it turns out, a wide range of empirical studies in psychology show that, yes, indeed, belonging to social groups gives us a sense of security. Strikingly, however, some of that very same research reveals the inverse pattern. Social identities can also feel us leaving deeply insecure. Now, we know this from our own experience. Belonging to a group can make us feel warm and safe, but the risk of not belonging can leave us feeling the exact opposite. And ironically, and we've seen this very clearly in recent years, the more we lean into these identities as a society, the less secure we seem to feel. Sharpening the boundaries of these group identities, whether metaphorically, by revisiting again and again who qualifies for this group or that group, or quite literally, by building actual physical walls. These things have done very little to quell our anxiety. Our collective tribal anxiety, our insecurity, is going up, not down. So if social identities hold the promise of security, they also carry the prospect of threat. The question is why? Why are these identities so susceptible to insecurity? And why is the security they promise us so precarious and so elusive? The answer lies in two core features of these traditional identities. First, these identities are, by definition, bounded and exclusionary. Take any category of race, gender, ethnicity, nationality, and so on, party, and you'll find that some human beings fall within their bounds of inclusion and some people fall outside of them. There is literally always an other. Second, these identities are social constructs. They're invented and perpetuated by human beings. I call them contingent because, again, if you take any one of these groups, these social groups, you'll find that they're contingent upon, that is, they depend upon a range of things that are not essential to human reality. For example, certain shared beliefs about social and biological reality, contested details and accidents of history, socially constructed parameters of membership, and often, tragically, shared experiences of oppression and injustice. In other words, and as geneticists and social scientists widely agree, we don't carry pre-existing essences that define our group identities and that divide us into categories. We've created those categories ourselves, along with the meanings, practices, and boundaries that define them. Race is a very clear example of this. The evidence is very clear that there's no genetic or scientific basis to race. It was invented in order to perpetuate a social and economic hierarchy. Nations are also fictions in the sense that our planet did not come with borders and national narratives. We made those up. Some human beings made those up. And research now shows that even gender identity, that is, the social traits and practices that we associate with each gender, these are also largely socially constructed and perpetuated by shared assumptions and stereotypes. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that these identities are not real in their consequences or in our experience of them. You know, discrimination based on race is obviously not a delusion. The patriotism of a soldier who dies on the battlefield is not unreal or imaginary, and neither is the pride you might feel in your racial or ethnic heritage. My point is just that the basis and boundaries of these identities are socially constructed and contingent. They're not essential and pre-existing. They're socially constructed. And because they're socially constructed, they can be reconstructed. And in fact, they are. One of the characteristics of our contemporary identities is that they're parameters of membership. Who belongs and who doesn't? Who's in and who's out? The answers to these questions are always up for debate. They're contestable and they're fluid. Let me give you an example you might be familiar with. On a September evening in 2016, the San Francisco 49ers and the San Diego Chargers took to the field to play their first NFL preseason game of the year. A naval officer sang the national anthem, the players stood on their feet, but San Francisco quarterback Colin Kaepernick fell to one knee. Kaepernick later explained that his refusal to stand during the national anthem was intended to protest systemic racism in the United States. Now, supporters of the kneeling praised it as highly patriotic and fundamentally American. Critics, however, saw it very differently. They said it was decidedly unpatriotic and un-American. In fact, in their narrative of Americanness, kneeling became a failed litmus test for the true American. I share this story in order to demonstrate that our conventional identities have bounds of inclusion that are neither permanent nor fixed. The narratives that define these identities are continually being reconstructed and retold. And because some human beings always fall outside of their bounds, every retelling brings the risk of new exclusions. Insiders today can be cast as outsiders tomorrow. Those who belonged yesterday might not belong today. In other words, there's a perpetual state of instability. And this instability is not limited to national identity or to any one part of the political spectrum. The question of who belongs is a ubiquitous and unresolved one in our society. Are you feminine or masculine enough? Are you gay or straight enough? Who counts as a liberal or a progressive or a conservative? Who qualifies as white or black? Incidentally, Colin Kaepernick, who is biracial, and you might know was raised by white adoptive parents, was also criticized for not being black enough to lead a protest against systemic racism. So where these familiar traditional social identities are concerned, the risk of insecurity and threat is always present. Insecurity, it seems, is always lurking in the shadow. So what's the solution? Can our particular identities be stabilized? Can our identities find a sense of a sense of security that is deep and enduring and stable, rather than elusive and superficial? The answer, I think, is yes, and it lies in an altogether different kind of identity. An identity rooted not in the things that distinguish us, but in our fundamental oneness as human beings. An identity based on the oneness of humankind is qualitatively different than every other kind of social identity we've been talking about. In fact, it's entirely unique for at least two reasons. One, unlike all of our other identities, it has no bounds of inclusion. It has no parameters of otherness. Insofar as the community of human beings is concerned, it literally has no other. Second, unlike our bounded identities, a universal human identity doesn't have to be rooted in historical contingencies and human-made constructs. What I'm hypothesizing here is that, in fact, there is something essential and non-contingent that we all share as human beings. Now, we might give it different labels, we might describe it in different ways, but to many human beings, it will seem intuitive, even obvious, that we hold something deep and fundamental in common. Perhaps you sense this oneness in the profound, almost painful love we have for our children and our families. Maybe you feel it in the way our hearts are moved by a piece of music, or in the awe we feel when we stand before a stunning landscape or contemplate the vastness of the universe. Maybe you sense this oneness in our shared yearnings for community and agency and meaning, or in our longing to connect with something greater than ourselves. Or perhaps you perceive our essential humanity in the way our souls are aroused by the stirrings of justice, or in the resilience we can show in the face of unimaginable suffering. Or maybe you see it in the countless fears and vulnerabilities we share with our fellow human beings, whatever their context or circumstance, whatever their particular piece of human diversity. Now, let me be very clear. The concept of the human has been used to create a wide range of false universalisms. universalisms that have been used to, for example, claim that women or Black people don't count as humans. Our concept of the human has been used to marginalize people rather than to promote their unqualified embrace. Many of you will know that some of our greatest injustices in history bear the stamp of these false universalisms. But for now, if we entertain the possibility of a genuinely universal human identity, an identity that by definition must be non-exclusive and free of the human-made contingencies that make it possible to question the humanity of some people. If we accept that, then an altogether new horizon of possibility opens up. Why? Well, let's go back to these bounds of inclusion that we were discussing. When the boundaries of identity become non-exclusionary and non-contingent, when they can't be reconstructed in a way that excludes some people, then we get parameters of belonging, parameters of membership that are immovably inclusive. In other words, they are thoroughly stable and safe. Only this kind of identity, an identity rooted in the oneness of humankind, can finally deliver a fundamental and enduring sense of security that we've all been seeking. One belongs because one is human, full stop. Now, there's actually some pretty powerful empirical evidence in psychology to suggest this. Research shows that identifying with the humanity of others is associated with greater sense of security, and that a greater sense of security leads to the relief of intergroup hostility, and in fact creates a posture of care, altruism, empathy, and openness to outgroups. So what all of this means taken together is that by resituating our conventional identities within parameters of inclusion that are safe, immovable, and all-inclusive, a universal human identity can fundamentally relieve the instabilities and the crises that have forever shadowed our other identities. A universal human identity can finally deliver the context of deep security that individuals and social groups have long been yearning for. But security is not the only thing we get. We don't just get a stable equilibrium of peaceful coexistence. When individuals and groups feel deeply secure, other things happen. All of the cost and energy that goes into maintaining a posture that is offensive or defensive, all the energy that goes into survival and self-protection, all of these things can give way to more generative and constructive expressions of diversity. In other words, through the felt security and certainty of belonging that a universal human identity provides not just protection to our other identities by protecting them from their own instabilities or from the threat of other groups, but it also gives them liberation or freedom from the imposing weight, the constraining weight that a context of threat has imposed on the expression of their potential. So far from stifling the diversity of humankind, far from threatening the things that distinguish us as human beings, a reimagined universal identity provides a powerful lubricant for the expression of diversity on altogether new terms. A universal human identity is uniquely equipped to ensure the security and flourishing of our particular identities, communities, and affiliations, whatever those affiliations might come to look like once we've deeply embraced the truth of our oneness. So what I've shown is not just that our unity and our diversity are complementary, but that we need to move beyond rational recognitions of moral equality and universal rights to more feelingful, more emotionally rich expressions of human oneness. Expressions of human oneness in the realms of identity and love. This is true not just for all the reasons I've given, but also because the recognition of distinctiveness depends on love. To appreciate why, think of those you love. You honor and you protect their universal rights and entitlements, of course, but you're also deeply invested in their distinctive stories. You're moved to understand the full texture of their experiences, to give voice to their particular insights and perspectives. When you love someone, you are attentive to the specific burdens they've carried, to the particular harms they've suffered. Thick, feelingful bonds of human connection, bonds of love, are necessarily conducive to the appreciation of difference, to the recognition that our stories as human beings are not all the same. And so, as paradoxical as it might seem, in order to recognize and respond to the diverse realities that make up the human experience, we need to lean fully into our oneness and give our shared humanity bold expression in the feelingful realms of identity, solidarity, and love. Now, I stand before a room of innovators and entrepreneurs, builders and visionaries, people who have imagined the world in ways big and small, not as it is, but as it might be. And I'm here to tell you that we need to take that same spirit of daring imagination to the very concepts and assumptions upon which our societies are built. If we want profoundly transformed societies, we need to boldly reimagine the concepts that shape our world, including our deep-seated concepts of identity and human oneness. Thank you.
Think of sharing what you know.